Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a really fascinating question. Can the power of our personal connections, our social networks, actually stand up to the enormous power of giant corporations and top-down governments? It's a big thought, so let's get into it. It's a huge question, right? But it's one we all kind of feel the answer to every day. When you think about everything from the price of gas to your own job security, it really does seem like the biggest, most important decisions are being made in some boardroom or government office miles away from our actual lives. So where does all that concentrated power really come from? For as long as I can remember, the debate has always been framed like this, as a choice between two sides. You've got government intervention on one side, with the state calling the shots, and on the other, you have the so-called free market, where competition is supposed to sort everything out. But what if both of these paths actually lead to the exact same problem? That's the argument Dr. Prince Aby's research explores. And that problem has a name: strategic failure. This is what happens when those huge decisions about our economy, about where money gets invested, about how many jobs are created, about the entire direction we're headed, are all made by a small group of elites at the very top. And here's the kicker. It doesn't really matter if they're in a government building or a corporate headquarters. Their interests just don't always line up with the rest of ours. And look, this isn't some brand new idea. Economists were flagging this issue decades ago. They were pointing out this fundamental disconnect between the people making the decisions and the people who have to live with the consequences. So that really begs the question, how did this top-down structure get so powerful in the first place?
Well, to understand the giant global picture, we actually have to start really small. We have to look at how a single business grows. Because, as you'll see, the logic of centralizing power and control, it's baked in from the very beginning. An economist named Stephen Heimer came up with this brilliant metaphor to explain it. He said a business starts as a little workshop, then it grows into a factory. Then it becomes a national corporation, and eventually it's a massive transnational skyscraper. And Heimer's description is just so vivid. He said managers rule from the top of skyscrapers. On a clear day, they can almost see the world. What a powerful way to show how decision-making gets further and further away from the people on the ground. Okay, so if this top-down hierarchy, this skyscraper, is the problem, could a bottom-up approach be the solution? Is there anything out there that can act as a shield for regular people and communities against the fallout from all this concentrated power? Well, according to the research we're looking at today, the answer is a definite yes. And that solution is something called social capital. It's a really simple idea, but it's incredibly powerful. Basically, social capital is the value we get from our relationships. It's the trust, the goodwill, the shared understanding that exists in our communities, with our friends, in our families. You know the saying, it's who you know? Well, this is more like it's who you trust. But here's the catch. Building that social capital requires real participation, not fake participation. And as this ladder of participation shows, not all involvement is created equal. Way down at the bottom, you have manipulation, which is basically participation for show. It's just a pretense. The real goal is to climb that ladder, past just being consulted, and all the way up to citizen control, where people have genuine, actual power over the decisions that affect their lives. And just like participation, social capital itself isn't just one thing. It has different levels, different strengths. At the very top, you've got those strong ties. That's your family, your closest friends. And then it goes all the way down to the weak ties, like a simple market transaction. Every one of these levels gives us a different kind of resource or support.
So how does this resource, this whole web of relationships, actually protect us from that strategic failure we were talking about? Well, the research boils it down to three main benefits.
Those benefits are information, influence, and solidarity. So let's quickly break down what each of those really means in the real world. We'll start with information.
First up, information. I mean, just think about it. When you need a recommendation for a good plumber or you hear about a new job opening, where do you usually get that info? Chances are it's from someone you know and trust. Our social networks are just incredibly powerful channels for getting good, reliable information fast. Second is influence. This one is huge. The voice of one person, that can be pretty easy for a big company or government to ignore. But when a whole group of people, connected by trust and a shared goal, speaks up together, well, that's a different story. That's the core of collective action. It turns a bunch of whispers into one powerful, unified voice. And finally, solidarity. When a community really trusts itself and shares the same basic norms, it can often police itself. People cooperate and do the right thing not because they're being watched, but because they feel a sense of shared purpose and responsibility. And that is way more effective and a whole lot cheaper than having top-down rules and constant surveillance.
Okay, this all sounds really good in theory, doesn't it? But could you actually run a massive global company this way? Well, people have tried. And one of the most famous attempts came from the founder of Visa, of all places. He dreamed up this radical new kind of company, the Chaotic Organization, a name that literally smashes together chaos and order.
And the principles behind it are, well, they're revolutionary. Just imagine a company that's owned fairly by everyone involved, a place where power isn't held at the top, but it's pushed out to the edges as much as possible. An organization where no single group can dominate the decision-making. That is the Shortick dream. And in its early days, Visa actually did put some of these ideas into action. I mean, it got competing banks to work together, which is amazing, and it gave its members a lot of autonomy. But there were also some big weaknesses. Trying to get everyone to agree on everything was super inefficient, and sometimes decisions had to be based on the lowest common denominator, like sticking with the magnetic strip on credit cards for years because not every member bank could handle newer tech. But here was the real deal breaker, the fatal flaw in the experiment. The powerful banks that owned Visa, they just refused to give up their control. They wouldn't let customers or the stores that use their system become co-owners. So in the end, they stopped short of the most important chaotic principle, the one that required them to truly share power. But don't think that Visa's story is the end of it. For a different take, you can look at the Mondragon Corporation over in Spain. It's this massive federation of worker cooperatives. That means the employees are the owners. And it proves that democratic principles and worker control actually can work on a huge scale. We're talking hundreds of different companies and tens of thousands of worker owners. So let's bring it all home. The core problem we're talking about is strategic failure, this massive concentration of economic power at the top. And the potential solution, the counterbalance, is to build social capital from the bottom up, to harness the power that's already there in our trusted, connected communities. Which leaves us with one last massive question to chew on. In a world that seems to be dominated by these giant, impersonal skyscrapers, can we really reshape our global economy using something as simple and as deeply human as the trust we build between each other? Thanks for joining me on The Explainer.